The thing about owning a 100-year-old dam upstream from the fanciest neighborhood in Colorado Springs is that nobody remembers you exist until something goes wrong. I inherited the property from my grandfather 5 years ago, a modest 15-acre plot with a house that had seen better days and a concrete dam that controlled the flow of Cascade Creek. The dam fed into a reservoir that wound its way down the mountain, eventually becoming the centerpiece of Pinnacle Heights, an exclusive HOA community where homes started at $2 million and the monthly dues cost more than most people's mortgages. My property sat a mile upstream, hidden behind pine trees and accessible only by a dirt road that turned into a mud pit every spring. I worked remotely as a software engineer, which meant I could live anywhere with decent internet. The solitude suited me fine. I spent my days coding, my evenings fishing, and my weekends maintaining the dam and property. The dam itself was a beauty, built in 1924 by my great-grandfather to power a small mill operation. These days it just controlled water flow, and according to the deed and Colorado water rights law, I held complete legal authority over its release mechanisms. For 5 years, nobody from Pinnacle Heights bothered me. I kept the water flowing at steady levels, maintained the dam diligently, and minded my own business. That changed on a Tuesday morning in late May when a silver Mercedes SUV came grinding up my dirt road, throwing rocks and dust everywhere. I was on my deck drinking coffee when this woman stepped out, wearing white pants and designer sunglasses that probably cost more than my truck. She looked around my property like she had just stepped in something unpleasant. "Are you Frank Norwood?" she called out. "That's me," I said, not bothering to stand up. She marched over, her heels sinking into the soft earth with each step. "I'm Patricia Carmichael, president of the Pinnacle Heights Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your dam." "What about it?" Patricia pulled off her sunglasses with a dramatic flourish. "The water level in our reservoir has been fluctuating. It's affecting property values. Our residents pay premium prices for consistent waterfront views." I took a sip of coffee. "The water level is exactly where it's supposed to be. We had heavy snowmelt this year. I've been managing the release to prevent flooding downstream." "That's the problem," she said. "You're managing it. We need consistency. Our community has standards." "Madam, I have legal water rights here. I manage this dam according to state regulations and common sense. If the water's a few inches higher or lower than usual, that's called nature." Her face flushed red. "This is unacceptable. I'm going to need you to maintain the water at precisely the levels we require. I've brought documentation showing the optimal depth for our property values." She actually pulled out a folder from her expensive handbag. I didn't take it. I don't work for your HOA, I said. "I work for gravity and rainfall. The dam stays managed the way I manage it." Patricia's mouth became a thin line. "Mr. Norwood, I don't think you understand who you're dealing with. The Pinnacle Heights HOA has considerable resources and legal connections. We can make things very difficult for you." "And I have a dam that controls your entire water supply," I replied calmly. "One phone call to the release mechanism, and your fancy reservoir becomes a creek bed. But I wouldn't do that because I'm not petty. I suggest you head back down the mountain before your Mercedes gets stuck in that mud patch near the bottom." She stood there trembling with rage for a moment, then spun around and stalked back to her vehicle. The Mercedes fishtailed on the way out, and I watched it disappear down the slope with a sense of satisfaction I probably shouldn't have felt. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, I received a cease and desist letter from a Denver law firm claiming that my dam operation was causing irreparable harm to the Pinnacle Heights community and demanding I maintain water levels within a specific range, regardless of weather conditions or safety concerns. The letter threatened legal action if I didn't comply. I called my own lawyer, a straightforward guy named Robert Chen, who had handled my grandfather's estate. He read through the letter and laughed. "This is garbage, Frank," he said. "You have documented water rights dating back a century. They have no legal standing to dictate how you manage that dam. Send them a response telling them to pound sand in legal terms." "They seem pretty determined," I said. "Rich people always think money means they're right," Robert replied. "Hold your ground. You're not doing anything wrong." Robert drafted a response laying out my legal rights in excruciating detail. I sent it certified mail and figured that would settle things. I should have known better. The following week, a county inspector showed up at my property, clipboard in hand, saying he had received complaints about the dam's safety and needed to conduct an immediate inspection. This was suspicious because I had just passed my annual inspection 2 months earlier with flying colors. The inspector, a tired-looking man named Gary, seemed apologetic. "Look, I know this is unusual," he said, "but when we get complaints, we have to investigate." "Let me guess," I said. "Pinnacle Heights HOA?" He didn't confirm it, but his expression said enough. We spent 2 hours going over every inch of the dam. Gary checked the structural integrity, the release mechanisms, the overflow systems, everything. Finally, he put down his clipboard and shook his head. "This is one of the best-maintained private dams in the county," he said. "Whoever filed that complaint was wasting everyone's time. You'll get a clean report in the mail." "Appreciate your thoroughness," I said. "Between you and me," Gary added quietly, "be careful with those HOA people. I've seen them pull some nasty tricks when they don't get their way." His warning proved prescient. Over the next month, I dealt with a parade of harassment. The county sent someone to check my septic system based on an anonymous complaint. The fire department showed up to inspect my property for wildfire hazards, another anonymous complaint. Someone called the State Wildlife Division claiming I was interfering with fish migration patterns, which was ridiculous since the dam predated any endangered species listings and had grandfather exemptions. Every inspection came back clean, but each one cost me time and stress. I knew exactly who was behind it, but proving it was another matter. Then, Patricia made a critical mistake. I was in town getting supplies when I ran into my neighbor from 2 miles east, a rancher named Bill Henderson. Bill owned a large cattle operation and had been nothing but friendly in the 5 years I had lived there. "Hey, Frank," Bill said, looking uncomfortable. "I need to tell you something. That HOA lady came by my place last week." "Patricia Carmichael?" "That's her. She offered me $50,000 if I would testify that your dam was causing flooding on my property. She had papers all drawn up and everything." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell her?" "I told her to get lost," Bill said. "Your dam hasn't caused me a single problem. But I thought you should know she's trying to build some kind of case against you. She mentioned getting other neighbors involved too." "Thanks for the heads up, Bill." I immediately called Robert Chen and told him what happened. He whistled low. "That's attempted witness tampering, potentially fraud," he said. "Did Bill keep any of the paperwork she gave him?" "I'll ask." Bill had kept everything. Patricia had been sloppy, leaving documents with the HOA letterhead showing they were willing to pay for testimony against me. Robert was practically gleeful. "This is ammunition, Frank. If they escalate, we can bury them with this. Document everything from here on out, every interaction, every complaint, every inspector they send. We're building a harassment case." I started keeping detailed logs. I installed security cameras around my property. I backed up every email and saved every letter. The harassment continued, but I was ready for it. In July, the situation took a dramatic turn. Colorado was experiencing a heat wave, and water levels everywhere were dropping. I carefully managed the dam release to maintain adequate flow downstream while preserving the reservoir's capacity. It was a delicate balance, and I spent hours each day monitoring conditions. One evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered to hear Patricia's voice, but it sounded different, strained. "Mr. Norwood, this is Patricia Carmichael. We need to discuss increasing the water release from your dam." "The release is appropriate for current conditions," I said. "Our reservoir is dropping below aesthetic levels. The shoreline is showing. Property owners are complaining. We need more water. And I need to manage this resource responsibly. We're in a drought, Mrs. Carmichael. I'm not going to drain the reservoir just so your residents don't see mud." "We're prepared to offer you compensation," she said. $5,000 per month for consistent water levels." "The water isn't for sale," I replied. "And even if it was, you couldn't afford what ecological responsibility costs." She hung up without another word. I should have felt victorious, but something about her tone worried me. She had sounded desperate, and desperate people make dangerous choices. 2 nights later, at 2 in the morning, my security system alarm went off. I jolted awake and checked the camera feeds on my phone. Two figures were moving near the dam in the darkness, carrying what looked like tools. I called 911 first, then grabbed my flashlight and the baseball bat I kept by the door. By the time I reached the dam, the figures had scattered, but they had left evidence of their work. Someone had attempted to tamper with the manual release wheel, trying to force it open. They had damaged the locking mechanism and left scratches all over the metal. The El Paso County Sheriff's deputies arrived 15 minutes later. I showed them the camera footage and the damage. The video quality wasn't good enough to identify faces clearly, but you could see two people, and one of them appeared to be wearing heels based on their gait. "This is serious," Deputy Martinez said. "Tampering with a dam is a federal offense. We'll need to get the Corps of Engineers involved." "I know who's behind it," I said, and explained the whole situation with the HOA. The deputy took detailed notes. "We'll investigate, but we need hard evidence linking specific individuals to this crime. The video shows people, but we can't identify them conclusively." I spent the rest of the night securing the dam and installing additional cameras with better night vision. At sunrise, I called Robert Chen and explained what happened. "This is escalating dangerously," Robert said. "File for a restraining order against Patricia Carmichael and the HOA board. We have enough evidence of harassment, and now there's criminal activity. I'll also send them a letter making it clear that any further interference will result in a major lawsuit." The restraining order hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In the meantime, I hired a security company to install professional-grade surveillance around the dam and my property. The cameras had crystal-clear night vision, motion sensors, and cloud backup. If anyone came back, I would have evidence. They came back. 4 nights after the first incident, at 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I pulled up the camera feed and felt my blood run cold. 3 people were at the dam, and this time they had more serious equipment. One of them was working on the release mechanism with an electric grinder, sending sparks flying. I called 911 again and ran outside, but this time I stayed back and let the cameras do their job. I had learned from the deputies that confronting criminals in the act was dangerous and potentially complicated prosecution. Instead, I stood on my deck with my phone recording, ready to provide live updates to dispatch. The intruders worked frantically, clearly trying to force the dam release open. If they succeeded, it would send a massive surge of water downstream that could cause real damage, and worse, it would drain the reservoir that supplied Pinnacle Heights and 2 other communities. Sheriff's deputies arrived faster this time, must have been closer to the area. The intruders heard the sirens and tried to run, but they had parked their vehicle at the base of my access road, and there was only one way out. Deputies caught all 3 of them. I walked down to the dam as the deputies were putting the suspects in handcuffs. Even in the darkness and commotion, I recognized one of them immediately. Patricia Carmichael looked nothing like the polished woman who had first visited my property. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes dirty, and her face showed pure panic. "Mrs. Carmichael," Deputy Martinez said with evident surprise, "you want to explain what you're doing here at 3 in the morning with tools?" "This is a misunderstanding," Patricia stammered. "We were just inspecting the dam. Mr. Norwood has been mismanaging the water, and we needed to see the situation for ourselves." "With an electric grinder?" Martinez held up the tool. "At 3 in the morning? After being told about previous tampering?" The other 2 suspects were members of the HOA board, as I later learned, a man named Douglas Freeman, who served as treasurer, and a woman named Victoria Pierce, the secretary. All 3 of them were read their rights and arrested. The damage they had caused was significant. They had partially cut through the release mechanism's control valve, which meant I couldn't safely adjust the water flow until it was repaired. Worse, they had weakened the structural integrity of the valve housing. I had to call an emergency dam maintenance company at 4 in the morning to come assess the situation. The engineer who arrived at dawn, a woman named Susan Rodriguez, examined the damage and shook her head in disbelief. "Someone tried to force this valve open," she said. "If they had succeeded, the sudden release would have sent a wall of water downstream, could have killed someone, could have collapsed the whole dam structure. This is unbelievably reckless." "Can you fix it?" I asked. "Yes, but it's going to take a few days and cost about $15,000 for emergency repairs, and you'll need to document all of this for insurance and law enforcement." I took detailed photos and videos of everything. Susan's company began work immediately, bringing in equipment and materials. The sheriff's department sent an investigator who spent hours documenting the crime scene and interviewing me. "This is one of the stranger cases I've worked," the investigator, Detective Sarah Williams, told me. "HOA president attempting to sabotage a dam, that's a new one." "She wanted control of the water," I explained. "When she couldn't get it legally, she tried other methods." "Well, she's facing serious charges now. Criminal mischief, attempted sabotage of water infrastructure, trespassing, conspiracy. The federal prosecutors might get involved too, since this involves water systems. Your HOA president is looking at potential prison time." The news spread fast. By the next morning, reporters from Colorado Springs and Denver were calling me. I declined all interviews on Robert Chen's advice, but the story made regional news anyway. "HOA president arrested for dam sabotage" was the headline that ran everywhere. The Pinnacle Heights community went into chaos. Residents started calling me, apologizing for Patricia's actions and begging me not to shut off their water supply. I assured everyone that I had no intention of punishing innocent homeowners for their HOA board's criminal behavior. One call stood out. A woman named Linda Richardson, a Pinnacle Heights resident who served on the Architectural Review Committee, asked if she could visit. "I need to apologize in person," she said, "and I need to tell you some things about what's been happening in our community." Linda arrived the next afternoon, driving a sensible Honda instead of a luxury vehicle. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a tired expression. "Mr. Norwood, I'm so sorry," she began. "Most of us had no idea what Patricia was doing. She kept her campaign against you quiet, only involving a few board members she knew would go along with it." "I appreciate that," I said. "But how did it get this far? She must have been using HOA funds for lawyers and who knows what else." Linda nodded grimly. "That's what I came to talk about. Some of us started asking questions after the arrests. We demanded to see the HOA's financial records. Patricia has been spending tens of thousands of dollars on this vendetta against you. Legal fees, private investigators, payoffs to try to get testimony. She never disclosed any of it to the general membership." "That's embezzlement," I said. "We know. We've contacted the district attorney's office with the financial records. There's more trouble coming for Patricia and her accomplices. But I wanted you to know that the rest of us, the actual homeowners, we're horrified. We're going to clean house in the HOA and make sure something like this never happens again." "I appreciate you coming here to tell me that," I said. "There's something else," Linda continued. "Why did Patricia become so obsessed with this? It wasn't just about water levels. We found emails on the HOA server. She had been planning to develop the land upstream, your land, my property. Of course, 15 acres with water rights and dam access, sitting right above their exclusive community. It would be worth millions to a developer. She was trying to force you out," Linda explained. "If she could get you tied up in legal problems, or better yet, convicted of mismanaging the dam or causing damage, she could potentially move to have your property condemned or force a sale. Then the HOA could buy it, control the water completely, and possibly even develop luxury homes on your land." The scope of Patricia's scheme was breathtaking. This had never been about water levels or property values. It had been a calculated attempt to steal my property. "Do you have those emails?" I asked. "Copies are being provided to your attorney and the district attorney," Linda said. "We want full transparency. We're also voting to remove the entire board and install new leadership. Our lawyer says the HOA might be liable for Patricia's actions, and honestly, we deserve it. We elected her. We should have paid more attention." Over the following weeks, the situation unfolded like a legal procedural. Patricia Carmichael, Douglas Freeman, and Victoria Pierce were formally charged with multiple felonies. The federal government did get involved because tampering with water infrastructure fell under their jurisdiction. Patricia faced state charges of embezzlement, fraud, attempted extortion, and conspiracy, plus federal charges related to the dam sabotage. The preliminary hearings were public, and I attended one of them. Patricia looked diminished, sitting at the defense table in a simple blouse instead of her designer clothes. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had acted in what she believed were the community's best interests, but the prosecutor shredded that defense by presenting the emails about forcing me off my property. This wasn't about community welfare, the prosecutor stated. This was a calculated scheme to steal private property through harassment, fraudulent legal actions, and ultimately criminal sabotage. The defendant used her position of trust within the HOA to fund her illegal activities and endangered lives in the process. The judge denied bail reduction, noting that Patricia had already demonstrated a pattern of escalating criminal behavior and posed a flight risk given her resources. Douglas and Victoria took plea deals, agreeing to testify against Patricia in exchange for reduced charges. They both received probation and community service, along with permanent bans from serving on any HOA board. Patricia went to trial. The trial lasted 2 weeks. I testified about the harassment, the attempted bribery of my neighbor Bill, and the dam sabotage incidents. Bill Henderson testified about Patricia's offer of money for false testimony. Linda Richardson and other Pinnacle Heights residents testified about the financial irregularities and the emails revealing Patricia's true motives. The most damning evidence came from Patricia's own computer. Investigators found detailed plans for developing my property, including architectural drawings for luxury homes and financial projections showing millions in potential profits. She had been planning this for over a year, waiting for the right opportunity to set her scheme in motion. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, Patricia's lawyer pleaded for leniency, arguing she had no prior criminal record and had simply made poor decisions under stress. The judge was unmoved. "Mrs. Carmichael, you held a position of trust within your community," the judge said. "You used that position to embezzle funds, harass an innocent property owner, attempt to corrupt witnesses, and ultimately endanger lives by sabotaging critical water infrastructure. Your actions were calculated, persistent, and could have resulted in serious harm or death if that dam had failed. This court sentences you to 6 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years probation. You are ordered to pay full restitution for all damages, including the cost of dam repairs, Mr. Norwood's legal fees, and the HOA's embezzled funds." Patricia showed no emotion as she was led away. Douglas and Victoria, who had attended the sentencing, looked relieved their plea deals had spared them prison time. The civil lawsuits took longer to resolve. I sued Patricia personally for harassment and the cost of increased security measures. The judgment was substantial, though Robert Chen warned me that collecting would be difficult since Patricia's assets were largely frozen for restitution payments. "Consider it a moral victory," Robert said. "You've protected your property rights and sent a clear message that this kind of behavior has consequences." The Pinnacle Heights HOA itself reached out through their new board president, a retired engineer named Thomas Wright. They offered a formal apology and a settlement to cover any remaining expenses I had incurred. They also proposed a reasonable agreement about water level management, one that respected my legal rights while providing transparency about my dam operations. "We'd like to start over on the right foot," Thomas said when we met. "What Patricia did was criminal and wrong. We're implementing new oversight procedures to prevent anything like this from happening again. We're hoping we can be good neighbors going forward." I agreed to the settlement and the water management agreement. It wasn't legally binding on my operations, but it established good faith communication protocols. I would notify the HOA of any major water releases or maintenance that might affect levels, and they would respect my authority over the dam. Life gradually returned to normal. The enhanced security system stayed in place, more for peace of mind than necessity. I continued my software work, maintained the dam, and enjoyed the solitude of mountain living. Bill Henderson stopped by one afternoon with a case of beer. "Wanted to thank you for handling all that craziness without causing problems for the rest of us," he said. "That HOA lady was something else." "I just protected what's mine," I said. "Same as you would have done. Still, you could have made things difficult for a lot of people down the mountain. You kept the water flowing steady even when they were harassing you." That's character. We sat on my deck drinking beer and watching the water flow through the dam's release channel. The sound was soothing, constant, a reminder of the natural forces at work beyond human drama and schemes. "You ever think about what would have happened if she had succeeded?" Bill asked. "If she had forced that valve open?" The engineer said it could have been catastrophic, I admitted. Flash flood downstream, possible dam failure, who knows how many people could have been hurt or killed, all because Patricia wanted to control something that wasn't hers to control. Some people think money and position mean they're entitled to anything, Bill observed. Good thing the law doesn't see it that way. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story 6 months later, detailing the aftermath of what they called the Pinnacle Heights Dam scandal. Patricia was serving her sentence at a federal facility in Texas. The HOA had recovered most of the embezzled funds through insurance and Patricia's seized assets. Pinnacle Heights had implemented new governance rules requiring financial transparency and term limits for board members. I was quoted briefly in the article. "I just wanted to manage my property in peace," I had told the reporter. "Water rights are serious business in Colorado, and they exist for good reasons. No one person or organization should have the power to override legal protections that have been in place for generations." The article included a sidebar about Colorado water law and the importance of understanding water rights, especially for communities dependent on private water sources. Several legal experts weighed in, noting that Patricia's case had become a cautionary tale in HOA governance seminars. One unexpected outcome was the number of people who reached out to me with their own HOA horror stories. Apparently, abusive HOA boards were a widespread problem, though few cases escalated to actual criminal behavior. I couldn't help everyone, but I shared my experience and Robert Chen's contact information when it seemed like someone had a legitimate legal issue. The seasons changed. Summer heat gave way to fall colors, then winter snow. I maintained the dam through all conditions, managing water release with the same care I always had. The Pinnacle Heights community continued to thrive, and the new HOA board proved to be reasonable and professional. I received a Christmas card from Linda Richardson with a note inside. "Thank you for your patience and integrity during a difficult time. Our community learned valuable lessons about governance, humility, and respecting our neighbors. Wishing you peace and clear water in the new year." I put the card on my mantel next to a photo of my grandfather standing beside the dam in 1960. He had built something meant to last, and he had trusted me to protect it. I thought about what he might have said about the whole situation. Probably something simple and direct, like, "People forget that nature doesn't care about their opinions." The dam would outlast all of us, all the drama and schemes and legal battles. It would keep standing, keep controlling the flow of water down the mountain long after everyone involved in this mess was gone. There was something comforting about that permanence. On a clear morning in January, I was checking the dam's infrastructure when I noticed a car coming up my road. For a moment, old tension returned, but it was Thomas Wright, the new HOA president, driving a modest pickup truck. "Hope I'm not intruding," he called out. "Wanted to drop off the HOA's annual report. Thought you might like to see the new financial transparency measures we've implemented." I took the document and flipped through it. Every expense was itemized and explained, from landscaping to legal reserves. There was a dedicated section on water resource planning that acknowledged my dam's role and my authority. "This is impressive," I said. "We're trying to do things right," Thomas replied. "Most of us are just regular people who wanted a nice place to live. We got complacent and let the wrong person take control. Won't happen again." "I believe you," I said. Thomas hesitated, then continued. "There's something else. Some of the residents have been asking about you. They're curious about the dam, about how it works, about the history. I know it's a big ask, but would you ever consider doing a tour? Maybe in the spring when the weather's nicer? Just so people understand what you do and why it matters?" I thought about it. My first instinct was to refuse. I valued my privacy. But then I considered that maybe education was the answer. Maybe if people understood water rights and dam management, they would be less likely to follow someone like Patricia down a destructive path. "I'll think about it," I said. "Maybe a small group, just the basics." Thomas smiled. "That would mean a lot. Thank you for considering it." After he left, I stood by the dam and looked down the mountain toward Pinnacle Heights. Sunlight glinted off the reservoir, and I could see a few of the large homes perched along the shoreline. Those people depended on the water I managed, whether they fully understood it or not. The responsibility had always been there, but now I felt it more acutely. This wasn't just about my property rights or my grandfather's legacy. It was about being a good steward of a resource that served an entire community. Patricia had tried to take control through force and manipulation, but real authority came from knowledge, care, and respect for the systems we're part of. I spent the rest of the winter preparing for the spring tours. I researched the dam's full history, going through my grandfather's old papers and documents. I learned details I hadn't known before, about the engineering challenges of the 1920s construction, about the floods that had been prevented over the decades, about the delicate ecology that had developed around the managed water flow. When spring arrived, I hosted the first tour for a group of 20 Pinnacle Heights residents. Thomas Wright brought them up in a shuttle van, and I spent 2 hours explaining how the dam worked, showing them the control mechanisms, discussing water rights law, and answering questions. "Why do you do this?" one woman asked. "Manage the dam, I mean. It seems like a lot of work." "Because it matters," I said simply. "Water's life out here. Every farm, every community, every living thing downstream depends on this flow being managed responsibly." My grandfather understood that. He built this dam not just for himself, but for everyone who would come after. I'm just continuing that work. The woman nodded thoughtfully. Others asked technical questions about water levels and release rates. By the end of the tour, I could see a new understanding in their faces. This wasn't abstract anymore. They had seen where their water came from and met the person responsible for it. "Thank you for sharing this with us," Thomas said as the group prepared to leave. "I think everyone has a new appreciation for what you do. And hopefully they'll think twice before electing someone like Patricia to their board," I said with a slight smile. Thomas laughed. "Trust me, we've all learned that lesson." I continued doing occasional tours through the summer, keeping the group small and manageable. It became an unexpected connection to the community below me, a way to bridge the gap between isolated property owner and neighbor. Not everyone from those early conflicts disappeared from my life. I ran into Victoria Pierce at a hardware store in Colorado Springs about a year after the trial. She looked at me with such mortification that I almost felt sorry for her. "Mr. Norwood, I just want to say again how sorry I am," she said quietly. "What we did was inexcusable. I let Patricia convince me that we were protecting our community, but I should have known better. I should have questioned what we were doing." "You paid your debt," I said. "Focus on moving forward." "I am. I'm working with a nonprofit now, helping communities develop ethical governance practices, trying to make something good come from my mistakes." "That's admirable," I said, and I meant it. She thanked me and hurried away, and I realized that maybe some people really did learn from their errors. Victoria had made terrible choices, but she was trying to make amends. That was more than some people ever did. Douglas Freeman, on the other hand, I never heard from again. According to Linda Richardson, he had moved out of state shortly after his probation ended, too embarrassed to remain in the community where everyone knew what he had done. As for Patricia, she remained in federal prison. I didn't follow her case closely, but Robert Chen mentioned that she had been denied early release after showing no remorse for her actions. Some people never learned, never accepted responsibility. Patricia apparently still believed she had been justified in everything she had done. 3 years after the sabotage incident, I was approached by a writer working on a book about HOA abuses across America. She wanted to include my story as a chapter. "Your case is unique because it involves water rights and infrastructure," she explained, "but it also represents a larger pattern of HOA overreach and the dangers of giving too much power to unaccountable boards." I agreed to participate, though I insisted on reviewing anything written about me before publication. The resulting chapter was titled "The Dam Upstream: When HOA Ambition Meets Legal Reality." It was fair and accurate, focusing on the legal and ethical issues rather than sensationalizing the drama. The book became a minor bestseller in the nonfiction category, and suddenly I was getting calls from news programs and podcasts wanting interviews. I declined most of them, but I did agree to speak with a few legal programs and property rights organizations. If my experience could help other people understand their rights and resist HOA overreach, it was worth the temporary invasion of my privacy. One interview stood out. A young couple from Arizona called me after hearing about my case through the book. Their HOA was trying to claim control over their well water, demanding they meter and restrict their own water use to match what other homeowners received from the municipal supply. They're saying it's about fairness, the husband told me. But we bought this property specifically because it had water rights. Now they want to take that away. I spent an hour on the phone with them, explaining the legal principles that had protected me and recommending they contact Robert Chen for a referral to a good water rights attorney in their state. I later heard they had successfully fought off their HOA's demands. These kinds of calls came regularly for a while, always people facing some version of the same problem. An HOA that had overstepped its authority and forgotten that homeowners had rights beyond what the association dictated. I couldn't help everyone, but I tried to point people in the right direction. The dam itself required major maintenance work in the 4th year after the sabotage. The damage Patricia and her accomplices had caused, while repaired, had revealed some underlying wear that needed addressing. I hired Susan Rodriguez's company to do a complete overhaul of the release mechanisms and control systems. The work took 6 weeks and cost over $100,000. Fortunately, insurance and the restitution payments from Patricia's criminal case covered most of it. The new systems were state-of-the-art with electronic monitoring and remote control capabilities while maintaining manual backup systems. This dam is good for another 100 years now, Susan told me when the work was complete. Your great-grandfather built it right and you've maintained it properly. Not many private dams in this good condition. I felt a deep satisfaction hearing that. The dam represented continuity, responsibility, passing from one generation to the next. I didn't have children to pass it to, but I had made arrangements in my will to leave the property to a land trust with specific requirements for maintaining the dam and respecting the water rights. It would be protected long after I was gone. 5 years after the arrest, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Patricia Carmichael, postmarked from the federal facility where she was imprisoned. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was typed, single-spaced, and covered 2 pages. Patricia didn't apologize. Instead, she explained her perspective, how she had seen my property as an opportunity to create something grand for the Pinnacle Heights community, how she had believed she was acting in everyone's best interests. She claimed she had been pressured by other residents to do something about the water situation, that she had felt the weight of expectations and responsibility. None of it rang true. It read like someone trying to convince themselves they had been the victim, not the perpetrator. There was no acknowledgement of the actual harm she had caused, the laws she had broken, the lives she had endangered. I wrote back a single sentence. I hope you find peace, but I won't validate your choices. I didn't know if she would understand what I meant. Probably not. Life continued in its rhythm. Work, maintenance, fishing, the occasional tour group from Pinnacle Heights. The community and I had settled into a comfortable relationship based on mutual respect. They understood I would manage the water responsibly, and I understood their need for reasonable predictability. Thomas Wright served as HOA president for 4 years before stepping down, and his successor was equally reasonable. The culture of the Pinnacle Heights HOA had fundamentally changed. They were still strict about architectural standards and property maintenance, but they had learned the difference between appropriate governance and overreach. I upgraded my house over the years, fixing the roof, updating the kitchen, improving the heating system, but I kept the essential character of the place unchanged. It was still my grandfather's house, still the modest dwelling of someone who worked the land rather than ruling over it. On the 10th anniversary of my inheriting the property, I stood on the dam at sunset and reflected on everything that had happened. 10 years of solitude interrupted by one woman's greed and ambition, leading to arrests and trials, and ultimately a new understanding between neighbors. The water flowed steadily through the release channel, indifferent to human drama. That's what water did. It flowed according to gravity and pressure and the laws of physics, not according to anyone's desires or demands. My job was simply to manage that flow responsibly, to be a steward rather than a master. I thought about Patricia in her prison cell, still probably believing she had been right. I thought about Victoria trying to make amends through her non-profit work. I thought about Douglas, who had fled rather than face what he had done. Different responses to failure and consequence. But mostly I thought about the hundreds of people downstream who depended on the water I managed, most of whom would never know my name or give a thought to where their water came from. That anonymity suited me fine. The best infrastructure is invisible, working silently in the background of people's lives. As darkness fell, I walked back to my house and made dinner. Through my window, I could see lights beginning to appear in Pinnacle Heights far below, families settling in for the evening, children doing homework, couples watching television, all of them using water that flowed from my dam. I had learned something important through the whole ordeal with Patricia and the HOA. Power wasn't about control or domination. Real power was about responsibility, about understanding your role in a larger system and fulfilling that role with integrity. I held dam release rights that could control the water level of an entire community, but I had never once been tempted to abuse that power. That restraint, that commitment to proper stewardship, was more powerful than anything Patricia had attempted with her schemes and manipulations. She had wanted to seize control, but control built on coercion and criminality was no control at all. It was just destruction waiting to collapse. The night was quiet, except for the sound of water and wind through pine trees. My security cameras recorded nothing but deer and the occasional fox. The dam stood solid and strong, doing what it had done for 100 years. Tomorrow I would check the water levels, monitor the weather forecast, make whatever adjustments were needed to maintain proper flow. The day after that, I would do it again. And the day after that. This was my work, my responsibility, my life. And somewhere far downstream, families would turn on their taps and water would flow, clean and steady and reliable. They would probably never think about where it came from or the man who managed it. That was fine. Some of the most important work in the world happens in silence, without recognition or applause. I finished my dinner, checked the security cameras one last time, and went to bed. The water continued flowing through the night, as it always had, as it always would, managed by someone who understood that the greatest power was the power to serve something larger than yourself.